Welcome back to The Gift of the Struggle. We are here today with Kristin Selmeczy, who is not only a good friend of mine, but is the CEO and president of Maid of Bloomingdale and Mount Prospect and the CEO of Pillars of Franchising. We're here today to talk about her story through business as a mother, balancing all the things, and her evolution into the pink. It's got a common thread that kind of leads from the beginning up until today and where she plans to go in the future. So, Kristin, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. So, we want to start. As you know, we talk about the gift of the struggle a lot, and um, I think a pivotal thing in your life has been a struggle with domestic violence that has sort of propelled you into the direction that you have been going for quite some time. So, first of all, tell us just a little bit about you, your family, your businesses, and then I'm going to start asking you questions about that experience and how it formed your trajectory.
Sure. Well, I am currently living in Chicago. I have three wonderful children, a daughter and two sons. They're all in the teenage realm right now, which makes life exciting and interesting and absolutely stressful. Um, I grew up in central Michigan in a very small town when I was, I should say, I was born to a 15 and 16-year-old set of parents. Um, when I was in eighth grade, I decided that I was going to move to California where my dad had relocated for work. And that was a pretty momentous time in my life. And really, since then, through until about 15 years ago, I moved around a lot. So, and kind of dodged between places and people and I landed here.
In Chicago.
Yeah, not where I want to stay, but once you have kids and you have a house and you're married and then here you are.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you do kind of need to be where your kids have grown up and where they know their lives and all those things. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about the story. Of the experience you had with domestic violence. First, just tell us a little bit about that. And then we kind of are going to weave the story of how that has played into your life. So tell us about the struggle of that.
Well, it's interesting because I knew that my grandmother had lived through it, but I didn't really know like a lot of the details, right? It was kind of like in the background. There were comments and things when I was younger that I heard, and I was just like, you didn't really think much of it, right? And then um, my mom found herself in some really crazy situations, of which, again, a lot of the details didn't become clear until later. And then when I was in my late 20s, I married someone here in Chicago who had a lot of mental issues. um, I was married to him for 5 years. The I guess, it's the stereotypical thing of like, I don't know if it's stereotypical, right? But you see these flags, and why didn't you leave then? And you think, yeah, why didn't I leave? And I think so many women in general, myself included at that time, thought you could fix people, right? Like, well, I could fix that. That's okay. Like I see the struggle, I understand what he's going through. I can help him out of it, right? So it wasn't until we reached a very bad place that I finally said, I can't do it. And actually my girlfriend and her husband had come over. Ironically, their last big physical altercation was when my mother-in-law was on her way over for her own birthday party. And um, so my girlfriend, who is his cousin, and her husband were on their way over. And as he left with the police, they showed up, and her husband, who was a police officer at the time, said, every fight you have escalates. And looking at the marks on your neck, you have to understand that he's at the point now where you're beyond Like, now we're in scary territory. Next time he's really going to hurt you. And it was interesting because that time I remember, um, this was all over a debit card and his girlfriend and things of that nature. But I remember thinking, how am I going to get him off of me? And I folded the debit card so it was unusable and I flung it across the room. And as I did that, of course, he let go to go fetch the debit card. And that's when I was able to get away and call 911. Um, so that is a very short part of a battle that started with, there was going to be suicide, and then there were guns involved, and my other house was invaded with police, and just a lot of really crazy stuff. And there's certainly a lot of other people who've had far worse happen, and I can't imagine. Um, but it's they say that it's generational.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, well, I don't know. I mean, does it really have to be? And as I got older and I started to learn more about my mom's struggle, and I started to learn more and more about my grandmother's struggle, I thought, oh my God, am I one of those people? Am I one of those women that I just fell into this pattern? Because I didn't grow up with my grandfather being abusive. By the time I was older, he was not. He was pretty feeble, and he was so loving to me, and we had so much fun together. I mean, there was just no way I could have pictured him doing the things that he did.
Mhm.
Um, when things got crazy at my mom's house, that's when I had decided to move to California. And when I had come home for one summer, I found her laying outside in the sun, and I went out to talk to her, and she was just covered in bruises. And I'm like, whoa, like, you have to tell me right now what is going on. And it was like, mind your own business. Never mind. Go in the house. And so when I had talked to my brother a little more in depth, um, her live in boyfriend at the time had actually set her bed on fire with her in it. And nobody told me at the time. And I was like, holy crap. Like, this is so well, there was a movie, what was it called, like The Burning Bed or something, right? This is just too crazy. Um, and I think one common theme that has been through all of the situations that I've been involved in and some of the situations that I see, alcohol is like the common factor in what makes, in these cases, all men go off the deep end. So,
Yeah, so that was a common thread throughout your family's experience.
yeah, and I'm not a dry person. I drink, but I'm very cognizant. I did in college once drank some very cheap Kessler whiskey
Mhm.
because you drink what you can in college. You didn't have a lot of money, and you weren't supposed to be drinking anyway because you were a minor. So who's gonna complain about that? But I do remember that night having moments where I couldn't really remember, and my friend said to me the next day, "Okay, whatever that was that you drank, you are not allowed to have that anymore because you were nasty."
Mm.
And I thought, really? So since that day, I can drink other whiskeys, but I would never drink Kessler again because
Mhm.
I'm convinced, based on what they told me, that it is poison to me. So, and that story led to, one of the factors that I'm sure we'll talk about later of why I bought the business I did.
Mhm. Yeah. And, so in this story, in this narrative of your life, how did you feel in that situation about your power to get out, your power to change your circumstances? I mean, some of it is I can change someone else, I can change someone else, but what about your own power in that dynamic?
Yeah, that was really weird because I kind of went through this journey, if you want to call it that, where um I was always set out to not be like my parents,
Mhm.
right? So they got married right out of high school. I was not going to do that. They got pregnant 16, 17, 15. I was not going to do that. They got divorced. I was not going to do that. Well, by the time I was with this person, I had indeed already got married and divorced to my best friend from high school. And we were married for about a year and we're like, this is just not working. And we were still better friends than anything else. Um, so from that perspective, we were like, let's just say it didn't happen, right? It didn't count. so, but when I married this gentleman, um, I felt like this was my opportunity to do it right. Right. And I thought that I could be a better judge of character. But there were so many signs looking back. There were so many signs. And why I felt like I was suddenly the super therapist and could help him get through things. I mean, if anybody knows anything about Xanax, like 1 milligram tablet is like a pretty standard tablet, right? By the time I left him, he was taking like 15 Xanax a day just to be level.
Uh-huh.
We had gone numerous times. I hope you can't hear that. Numerous times where he thought he was having a heart attack and go to the hospital, and it's not a heart attack, it's anxiety attack.
Yeah.
And that's before people started talking about anxiety and mental health issues, right?
Mhm.
And so I was really um in the beginning I felt like, I can help him, right? Like there are things like what is causing the anxiety? How do we get past that? Is it money? Is it this? Is it that? And as I continued to do bigger jobs with more money, I realized that money wasn't the issue for him. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then um, at the end of it, when I finally moved out, when I finally got my own place, which by the way was not easy.
Mhm.
I mean, extracting yourself from a situation where we had a house. Um, it was a house that his parents had lived in. So even though they sold it to us and my money went into it, I really didn't have a place there, right? And I was really quite scared. We had had numerous interactions. Unfortunately, we worked in the same office. His girlfriend worked in the same office. So there was a lot of drama associated with that. Everybody knew that he had a girlfriend before I did.
Mhm.
Um, but nonetheless, there was a lot of things that happened where I needed to find a place to live, and my number one priority was to find a secured building. But my point with this is, initially you go in and you're going to help somebody, right? And then you go through this transaction where you're like, okay, it won't happen again. That was just a one off, right? You justify, oh, if I hadn't talked back, he would have never, escalated. Or, oh, if I would have remembered to call, it wouldn't have been an issue. And the reality is, when you're in a situation where someone is trying to control you, that's one of those flags.
Mhm.
When someone's trying to manipulate you, when somebody is, um, making everything you do considered to be wrong, those are flags you kind of have to pay attention to, right? And ironically, his mother helped me find the condo that I moved into. Ironically, as terrified as I was to go without his income and be able to survive, we were fortunate enough that we didn't have kids. I had a miscarriage, which I say, thank God that happened because I think, you know, the greater good knew that it was not a situation to bring a child into. And so thank God that didn't happen. And so it's obviously easier to leave when you're just worried about yourself. Um, I could never, I just recently, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10, told my dad because I knew that if I had told him, he would have flown out here and he would have probably killed the guy. I mean, he just would. I mean it somewhat figuratively, right? My dad's not a murderer, but um, it would have been very bad, and I would not have wanted to put my dad in a position where he felt like he needed to take control of a situation that I contributed to, right? Like that would be really bad. So, nonetheless, I lived in a secured building. I watched over my shoulder every single day until finally, thank God, I was granted a transfer to Atlanta and I got out of Chicago. And that was probably the best thing that I could have done was just to get out. But there's a lot of people who they have kids. That's super complicated, right? Like there's so many things that you have to think about. And it's today there are more resources for people who are victims of domestic violence. Um, for me, when I reached out to get help, um, the big thing is, did I go to the hospital after the incident? No, I didn't. I had marks on my neck. I had witnesses that saw the marks on my neck, but why would I go to the hospital for that? Right? Like wasn't something that I needed to do. Well, the police wrote a report and they wanted me to press charges. Well, the problem is when you're married and you get along really well with the other person's family, you know that if you press charges, it affects the entire family. And so I did get a restraining order, but I didn't press charges.
This is so
Now,
interesting too, because in the course of you telling this, you're still protecting everybody else.
yeah,
Even him. You're protecting him. You're protecting the family. You're protecting your dad.
yeah, yeah, I guess that's true.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about your power and your ability to leave, and even though you did, and you regained that power every step of the way, you're still in the telling of it talking about all of the other people that you were protecting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think for the people who are very close to me, they would say, "Of course you were. That's what you do." And I don't do it consciously. It's
Mhm.
self-consciously, right? And or subconsciously rather. And the thing is, like, I watched. In this case, I watched his mother struggle because as things happened with him, I learned that um, his father was abusive.
Mm.
I learned that um, his younger brother died of crib death, but one of them was seen standing by the bed, looming large at the same time. Now, I can't insinuate that anything happened. I have no idea, but it does kind of creep me out a little bit. After I was out, I don't even know that our divorce was finalized yet, to be honest. But I had moved, a three-bedroom house into my one-bedroom or two-bedroom condo, rather, and had finally, which takes me a long time, finally unpacked everything. And I found some boxes that weren't supposed to be in my possession, they were supposed to be in his. And again, my best friend at the time was his cousin. And I went through these boxes and I found old military papers. And I knew that he had been in the military and I knew that he had been discharged. But what I didn't know is why.
Mm.
And so as I read through those documents, I found that he had been talking of suicide the day before they were to do weapons training. And apparently something happened around that event. And forgive me because I don't remember all the fine details. Um, and then there were other acts of violence while he was in basic training that caused them to discharge him. It was going to be a dishonorable discharge, but his mother had a friend who ranked high with the military. And so they negotiated his treatment and allowed him to be honorably discharged.
Wow.
And I also knew that he had been removed from college, but actually the story I got is that he quit And in going through the same group of papers, I found that he was kicked out of school. He had attacked his girlfriend with a pair of scissors. He had counts of abuse with her on campus. He had attempted suicide, and so he was released from school. But those two big events, I had no visibility of. None. And it's just interesting because you don't really know a person, really, sometimes, I don't believe, until you're no longer in the situation. You wanna think you know, but do you? I mean, I don't know.
I don't I agree. I mean, in my first marriage, looking back now, I'm like, there was a mask on for the whole almost the whole time. And at the very end, and as I'm getting out of all that, the mask came off and I
Yes.
could see everything clearly. And since this is 20 years ago,
Yeah.
um, the mask, I don't know if it's because my sight is clear or because he was never able to pull the mask back on, but I will never not be able to see the things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both, right? I mean, if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who's abusive, um, at least in the situations that I have seen and been involved with, there's a blackness, a deadness to their eyes and their face. And so when they're in a rage, the lights are on, but there's really nobody home.
Mhm.
I mean, the time we that I wound up having to call, we had had an argument, who knows about what, and he had pulled out his guns and there were shells everywhere, and I just remember him pointing the gun. First, he was gonna kill himself, so he says,
Mhm.
and then he pointed the gun at my head, and I'm like, I just remember saying, "If this is what you think it takes to be a man, this is what it is to you, then go ahead. But you will have to live with it, and you'll have to live with my family who will hunt you down. Like, you won't get away with it. If you're gonna kill me, then you might as well kill yourself." And I remember him sitting so clearly in the chair in the corner, and he had the gun to his head, and I said, you don't know what to do in those times, right? Like, I'm not a psychologist, I don't talk people down, I don't know how to do that, but I said, "Oh, for God's sakes, if you're gonna do that, don't make a mess here, at least go in the bathroom and do it so your poor mother doesn't have to clean it off the drapes."
Mhm.
Like, what else do I say, right? Because I had said, "You have to think of your mom, you have to think of your mom," and then I was like, "If you're gonna do it, just go in the bathroom. I don't wanna see it. I don't wanna have to clean it up. Your mom's not gonna wanna clean it up. Just go." Because my whole theory was, how could I get to the phone? How could I get to the phone and dial 911? And luckily, when he fell for the going into the bathroom part, I was like, and I dialed 911. And when they answered, I just said, "Please don't shoot yourself. Put the gun away. Put the gun away." So that without him knowing I was on the phone with 911, they understood it was a bad situation. There were weapons involved. And sure enough, when they came to the condo we were staying in, there were shells everywhere. And they took both of his guns away, which he didn't need a Glock anyway. He didn't need a sawed off shotgun. Like, what the hell are you going to do with those things, right? At least back then, too. And that was like 93, 94. And I remember them taking him away and getting all the weapons out of the house. Supposedly, he's not allowed to have weapons anymore, which, for the sake of his wife and 3 children, now I hope that's still the case. Um, but I remember thinking, and this was before we were married, believe it or not, before we got married. And his mother came over, and I told her what happened, and she cried and cried and cried. Never told me that there's a history. Never said we've been down this road before. Nothing. So, he was required to stay in the mental ward of the hospital for 7 days, begged his psychologist to, help get him out and blah, blah, blah. Psychologist talks to the hospital, blah, blah, blah. We all schedule therapy, blah, blah, blah. Right. And things did get better, a lot better. And he was going to therapy. So when we decided to move forward and get married, I wasn't afraid at that time. I thought, okay, thank God we put this behind us. Everything's better. And we were pretty good for a while, a couple years. And then that's when things started up again. And, I'm not someone who's going to just see a bad behavior and not say something, right? So 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and the office room is glowing, and I walk in to find him on a porn site. I'm not going to just go back to bed. I'm going to be like, "What's up?" You know? And so I think here I am again saying out loud what I know isn't right, but that sometimes my confrontational approach probably was like throwing a little bit of gas on the flame, right? Does that make it wrong what I did? I don't know. People say I have a hard time taking responsibility for things at times. Um, but why would I not stand up for what's right? Why would I not try to point out that, listen, this is not working. This is not good. I'm just, it's strange. And then my dad and I've had conversations in the past few years, and he says, I just don't understand why you didn't tell me. And I shared my fear with them. And then my brother, unfortunately, had to witness a lot worse with my mom and her boyfriend. And he was really, well, he still is very upset by all of it. And my dad said, I don't understand. Neither of you told me any of that was going on. And I look at it now and I'm thinking, why didn't we say something? I mean, I know, but I don't know. Like my grandparents knew, right? My grandparents were there one day when dishes were being hurled across the kitchen. They watched my mom try to escape leaving the house, and he jumped on the hood of the car, and she was going around the corners as fast as she could, try to throw him off the hood of the car. Like there were people who knew, but I guess just not the right people who were going to make sure that the kids were protected, if that makes sense. And I don't think it's that they didn't want to protect us. I really think that they just didn't know how. And like my grandmother said when I asked her, like, all these things happen. Why didn't you leave? And she looked at me and she said, Chrissy, the thing is, back then, you didn't leave. That's not what we did. We stood there and we stood by our husbands and we got through it. And I thought, I remember telling her, well, that's just wrong. That just sucks. And then turns out, I tell her that just as I was coming out of the relationship myself. But it's just so interesting. And my mom passed before I got to have the same kind of conversation with her about, why didn't you just leave? But I have to think it was very much like me, right? So she didn't have a great paying job. I mean, she dropped out of high school, got her GED, but she had 2 kids before she was 18. Her and my dad were divorced before I was 4. And I don't think she had the confidence in herself to just say, we're out, and how do you pack up 2 kids as a mom with a low paying job and relocate everybody? I mean, especially with as much stuff as we all have.
Well, that's the thing. And, I think generationally it's probably gotten better and better in terms of the stigma isn't quite the same as it was in your grandmother's generation of divorce. The
Yeah.
resources are more available for people who might need a little help. The domestic violence is a topic that people are more willing to talk about and help people through. So hopefully things are gradually getting better and better and better. But I think too that, you talk about the mental health, and the mental health of a domestic violence victim is not good.
Yeah.
The confidence, the ability that you think you've been torn down whether it's physically or emotionally or both. So
Mhm.
how do you believe that you're able to, forge a new path? And like you said, we've talked to our kids about when you live with a boyfriend or girlfriend that it's so much harder to get out of it when you're financially intertwined and emotionally intertwined and living in the same space. It's not like you can just break up and say, see ya. You have to extricate yourself from all of those things. And are
Oh,
you
yeah.
mature enough to do that when the time comes? And do you have the financial wherewithal to do that? Because now you're becoming dependent on somebody else, even if you're both making
Yeah.
money, you're living the double income lifestyle. So there's so much that goes into all of those decisions and all of the stigmas, and you are protecting, people from knowing, and there's shame involved because
Oh, yeah.
you're protecting your dad because you don't want him to go hunt him down. But also, do you really want to admit that this is what's been going on behind closed doors? I mean, there's that whole other
Oh, yeah.
preservation of the illusion.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's I think I mean, obviously, I don't mention names, but people who have known me over the years know exactly. We know exactly that period of life. We lived through it with her because, I was working for the same company for 15 years, and those were people that were like my extended family, right? So they knew, not always to the exact extent, and most thought that we broke up because he got a girlfriend, right? They didn't realize the other side.
Yeah.
But, the good thing is, and thank God, I made it out. I found the strength to make it out. And there's so many women still that don't have the strength. They don't know where to start. And, it's, I think the biggest thing that we as women can do is help make sure that we're not only empowering people, because sometimes you say to empower people and it's like, okay, that's one of those warm, fuzzy HR words, right? But really make sure that we give the resources to people and make sure that people understand where these resources are, how they work. If someone had said to me that night when my girlfriend and her husband said, you can't do this anymore, if they had said, listen, we've got a place for you to stay. You don't need to worry about anything. We've got everything you need. Come here, stay a week. We'll help you. I would have been gone. But as it was, I stayed home and he returned home like 3 days later and we had to figure it all out again.
Yeah. So what did you learn from that? And some of this is retrospective. Like you may not know at the time, you may not have known what you were learning as you were doing it, as most of us don't. How did that inform the next part of your life?
Well, I think the one thing that I'm very cognizant of and sensitive to are people who, what's the word I want to say? People who are controlling, people who try to push their beliefs, their opinions on you too hard. Um, People who are demanding of you, people who just make you not feel good. I mean, the one thing I think it's so important for people to understand is that domestic violence doesn't have to be physical, right? So for a lot of people, they're like, well, I mean, I don't really know what, you know, he just never hit me. Okay, right. But every time someone degrades you, every time, and listen, I get it. You have fights and things get said, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the constant bullying. There are women who, in working with one of the shelters, she had left a financially abusive situation where she had 5 kids. Her husband always controlled the money, never gave her money for anything. She was lucky if she had enough money to have food in the refrigerator. And so I think that for a lot of us, if you don't understand what abuse is, and if you think like, wow, I've got this person in my life that doesn't allow me to be me, doesn't love me for who I am, continuously says bad things or whatever the case may be. It's a really good idea to talk to somebody and say, "Hey, is this normal?" Because a lot of times it's not normal. And, I had said something to someone about, I don't like being controlled. I don't like being given ultimatums, and it's like, well, what's wrong with you? It's not about, I have borders, I have limits, I have fences where you don't cross those things, right? And I think the big thing that I learned is that, and it's funny because you just called me out on it before, but you do have to work really hard at putting yourself first. I will tell you, as a mom, I am not first. I'm just not. And being married right now, I'm not first. So, of a household of five, often I have four children, and often I am last because that's just what happens. And I don't think that's unusual. I think a lot of us, that's just kind of how we're wired. That's how society has fit us in the box, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I think that every day you have to wake up and say, these are the things I'm going to do because I want to do them. These are the things I'm going to do for me. And whether that's spend an extra 5 minutes putting a nice hot compress on your face or taking a bath at the end of the day or just something to reinvest in yourself, I think is really important.
Yeah, it is. And I think you're right. There are phases of life where you're better able to do that and less able to do that. And
Yeah.
if there's crisis in the family, you're the bottom of the list every single time. So I mean, I think as parents, we've all probably experienced that. But at
Yes.
least being aware that there are times where you just need a minute or
Yeah.
5 or a week.
Yeah.
Um, and giving yourself permission that that's okay. I mean, that's the struggle is I think for a lot of women understanding that that is okay. It is okay and good to prioritize your physical and emotional and mental and spiritual health so that you can be those things for everybody else.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to just take it where you can get it, which is, 10 minutes in a bath. I mean, I used to hide out in the bathtub regularly when all of our kids were home, like
Yeah. Yeah.
one place people can't bother you.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's taking a walk around the block with the dog or, I mean, just something to clear your head and try to refocus. I mean, it's so easy to be overwhelmed.
Yeah. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That is 1-800-799-7233. Or you can call 1-800-787-3224 for anonymous confidential help.